Make care.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Macbeth.
And you,
I am.
Heard that's been great. We've not come across each other yet.
Yeah.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I know.
Mel training, they said bring the materials to the city attorney, just to make for whatever purpose. I haven't seen them yet.
No, I have not.
Okay. At some point, I'll get you those materials.
Always seated.
I believe so.
Move that.
Because Frank is out, so I would be the same. with you.
Well, of course.
Yeah, yeah. It was a good, really effective presentation.
Presentations together. LGS.
So you did print on a whole new.
So, yeah,
Jared-
whatever you need.
Awesome.
I'll take a look at it, and I can even reach out to John.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Awesome, thank you.
Janie, you didn't trust us to bring our old.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is the appointed hour, 6:15, and all of council's made it to their seats. Welcome one and all. Glad you're here, and thank you for joining us for this first work session of 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Purpose of our meeting this afternoon is organizational meeting and discussion. And the items on the agenda, is there any objection or additions or changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we will adopt it as presented. The first piece, let's see here. Consideration of council committees and assignments. In speaking with folks on council, we typically are operating and working as a committee of the whole, and unless there's a change or desire by council, we'll continue in that fashion. However, we do organize with our different committees, finance, fiscal, facilities, and there's another, social and economic. Thank you, Marilyn. With the swapping of placing Nick in Dennis's seat, we'll keep those the same just for practical purposes. And then as far as the assignments for boards and committees, I spoke with all of you and announced for the public, the appointments that I'd like to make are Leslie Strawn to continue on planning, Chuck Smith to serve on Main Street, Lexington, and the Blue Ridge Resource Authority, Mr. Alligood to serve on the Maury Service Authority, Mr. Ziegler to continue on RARO, Mr. Betts to serve on the Regional Tourism Board and Threshold as a board member, and then Marilyn Alexander to be the chair or the council liaison to Threshold, and also on Mountain Gateway Board of Directors. So I'll offer those up and greatly appreciate your all's time and talents. As Nick, you will learn and your peers know, the first and third Thursdays are just the down payment of your time. There's quite a bit more that goes into it with these boards and committees. And we're grateful for all of the people that serve on our various boards and committees, volunteering for and support of the city.
Frank,
Yes, ma'am.
I assume I'll continue on Rana as well.
Yes, thank you.
You're so good, you don't even notice us.
Thank you for not trying to get out of one. And Janie, if I missed any others, alert me, but I think that covers all of them. Next item on the business is the Council Code of Ethics, City Handbook. Your member statement is at your place, and there was a request from Councilman Strawn to review the Code of Ethics with some recommendations. And with that, introduce it and ask Leslie if you'd like to make any comments.
Yeah, just briefly, I would like to have some clarity in our code of ethics on what the conflict of interest statement is. I will just point out in our intro to our handbook on page 4 at the top, where it talks about conflict of interest, it does say section 2.2-3100 of the state code details the city's position on conflict of interest and is included in Appendix E, which is how I think most localities understand it, is that is your conflict of interest requirements. The state lays it out. There's no changing, we can't be any more lax than what is already there. But the wording that's in our city code of ethics, it adds some an extra almost sentence that doesn't need to be there. And I'm not sure what it means exactly. None of the terms are defined. And I'm asking that that be removed from our code of ethics.
From a procedure standpoint, this is for discussion. We don't typically take any action in work sessions. So would ask council to share their thoughts and engage in discussion on the issue. And then whether or not we want to bring it forward at a, make any changes and bring it forward at a council meeting either later this month or later this evening.
And I will also ask that we ask the attorney his opinion on it, and as far as if there's any other modifications that should be made as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jeremy, if you want to, if you want to
Sure,
weigh in.
Absolutely. And I did look at the,
Yeah,
I did look at the proposed edit that Ms. Strawn had suggested. And the deletion of the language does not lessen the impact or the efficacy of the Conflicts of Interest Act. Like she said, you can be no more lax than the Conflicts of Interest Act. You could, in theory, try to increase the obligations beyond what is required by the Conflicts of Interest Act, but you cannot come below those obligations. And striking the language that she proposes to strike would lead you to have to adhere to the terms of the Conflicts of Interest Act. It would mirror the Conflicts of Interest Act. In my opinion, it would add some simplicity because you would not be beholden to two separate standards. You'd be beholden to the same standard as every other governing body member in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so when, for example, when I get a question about whether something is a conflict or a potential conflict in providing advice, it would be simpler to be able to refer to one body of law, that being the Conflicts of Interest Act, rather than having to consider whether there are any local policies or procedures that differ from the Conflicts of Interest Act. So I think the striking of that language certainly makes sense and doesn't lessen any of your statutory obligations under the Virginia Code. I did note a couple other potential changes once I looked at the language. In that same paragraph, there is a reference to section 2.2-3101. I believe that's the definition section. In fact, I think that is probably too narrow of a reference. That probably should refer to chapter 31 of title 2.2 to make sure we're looking at the entire Conflicts of Interest Act, not just the definition sections when we're assessing whether there's a conflict. And then the next paragraph has a sentence regarding certain disclosures that have to be made by council members. As members of city council, you have to make disclosures that are required by the Conflicts of Interest Act. And the list in that sentence is not consistent with what's in the Conflicts of Interest Act. I would suggest striking that sentence and then again, having your obligation mirror the Conflicts of Interest Act. You would fill out the regular economic disclosure forms, which would have all the information that you would have to disclose and you'd be compliant. So long-winded, I apologize, but I think it is an effective change because it allows us to operate under one body of law and not have to look at multiple sources for making our decisions as to whether there are conflicts.
Since we have multiple components of our code of ethics, one that follows the Commonwealth of Virginia law, and then another one that is we hold ourselves to.
Mhm.
Am I correct? Well, actually, can you explain who is the judge and jury
You are.
on the
The self-imposed one, it would be
Yes.
you, and then the mechanisms of enforcement would be either an honor system, we expect you to hold yourself to it, or a reprimand type system, something along those. You could call somebody out if they violated your kind of self-imposed rules that extended beyond the obligations of the Conflicts of Interest Act. The Conflicts of Interest Act itself is enforced as spelled out in the statute. There are criminal and monetary sanctions for violating the state Conflicts of Interest Act. But as far as any separate rules that you set out, you would be in charge of enforcing it. And again, the calling out, if you will, for lack of a better term, members who you believe to be in violation.
Are there any instances where someone could declare their relationship or their potential conflict and then still participate?
Yes, under state law, there certainly are. There are circumstances, particularly with what we call transactions. A transaction is something that is considered by this council. And there are times when you have to recuse yourself from a transaction, a vote on a zoning matter, for example. There are also times when there could be an impact on you personally or your spouse, but because the impact extends beyond that to other people in the community or to the community at large, you can still continue to vote on a matter, even though it would also impact you. A classic example, and this is some of the easy examples never really come up in the real world, but an easy example is you've set property taxes. Well, those are going to impact you as well, but you can vote on them, even though they are going to impact you. If there is a zoning issue near a property that is close to your property or close to a business, even though it's not your property that's being rezoned because you're near it, it could have an impact on your property, but it's also going to have an impact. And Leslie, you mentioned in your email some of those exceptions, and one of them that was a group of 3 or more. Well, if the rezoning is going to impact 3 or more property owners, then you're part of a group, even though you may be one who is impacted, that you would be permitted to participate in that vote with a proper disclosure.
If my spouse works at one of the larger employers in town that owns a lot of property, and that entity is considering dealing with the city on an easement on a trail, I don't get rich off of the city working with an entity on an easement of a trail. Is that?
Maybe, and I hate to say that.
Oh, that's fine. That's why we're here. That's a work session.
The way that, again, the prohibited transaction language reads, and if you don't mind, I'll refer to it. The transaction has application solely to property or a business or governmental agency in which he has a personal interest. So do you have a personal interest, and is the action solely benefiting that property? If it is solely property of one of the large employers and your spouse makes more than $5,000 per year at that employer, then we would need to take a hard look and see if it would. Solely is the interesting word there. Solely is, there are not a lot of actions that solely benefit or affect one parcel or one business that this council undertakes, but there can be some. If you're rezoning a specific piece of property, solely going to be affecting that property in all likelihood, and I would probably encourage you to recuse yourself in that situation.
Ms. Alexander.
Some of us attended our Virginia Municipal League training session yesterday.
Good.
And one of the topics was about the conflict of interest. And the key to all of this is about whether you have personal interest in something. And interest involves whether you are in ownership of a business, have annual income that exceeds the $5,000 from the ownership of real or personal property in that business. And the personal interest talks about whether it gives you a financial benefit or liability. And then it talks about what you just stated about transactions, that you can state what your connection is to that transaction that we're working on, the nature of your personal interest in that transaction. If you are a member of a business, profession, occupation, or group which is affected by that transaction, and you're able to participate in that transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Yes, and that's exactly right. And the only thing I would add to what you said is sometimes that personal interest can extend beyond you individually and to a spouse and to somebody who lives in the home and is a dependent.
I think one of the examples they used yesterday was somebody's sister or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, a sister lives outside the house would not present an issue. A sister, if they lived in the same residence with you, would present an issue.
Yeah.
Correct.
The example was very specific. And Ms. Alexander, you're very modest. You and Nick are now both certified in Conflict of Interest Act from your attendance and certification yesterday. The former mayor of Stanton, her brother worked for a government agency that Stanton funded. And per the conflict of interest, even though it's her brother and it's a government agency and their funding, she had no conflict of interest because she had no financial benefit and he was not dependent upon her.
Correct.
However, she felt a strong sense that she should not vote on that and wanted to recuse herself. But the interesting piece in the Queen City of Stanton is that they had an ordinance that says if you do not have a conflict of interest, you must vote. And they went through the exercise of changing that ordinance. And now she's retired, but there's also an ordinance that she would not have to vote for that funding.
And generally, and you try to not use it as a crutch, but there are times when people legitimately, they may not have a legal conflict of interest under the Conflicts of Interest Act, but they may feel compelled to not participate in the consideration of an issue. And that's certainly appropriate to the individual's own circumstances.
Exactly. Nick?
So kind of along those lines, and based on the some of the proposed modifications, Councilmember Strawn had proposed the strike through in which they have a material financial interest or where they have an organizational responsibility or relationship that may give the appearance of a conflict of interest. Based on the fact pattern that we just discussed, I mean, some people may think that, to put it this way, would that the appearance of a conflict of interest being somewhat ambiguous and based on perception, could that cause potentially an issue and conflict with the state code?
Certainly, and you and I both being attorneys know that that's something we always have to take into account is the appearance of a conflict of interest. And there's not a lot of certainty as to that at times. And so when you have this additional language, it does create some ambiguity that you have to try to navigate. And it becomes difficult at times. It can become difficult at times. Does the Stanton situation where your sister and is on this funded organization, does that create an appearance of a conflict of it? It may in the eyes of some, it may not in the eyes of others. That's why, and again, back to lawyers, we like things that are clear, black letter law, you know.
Absolutely.
On and off. If we can eliminate some ambiguity, I think that serves everybody's purpose. But I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir.
So does our city charter and our code require us to vote unless we have an interest, which would be by law, or we are excused from voting by city council? So if we don't have an interest, but we also have our current code of ethics, which has this appearance clause, do we need to take action as a city council to formally excuse someone in that's stepping down because of our own code of ethics? Our charter says we have to vote also.
The charter certainly does. I'm not sure how it reads relative to the conflict of interest. I don't want to put our attorney on the spot because we're not it's not
I will
critical.
certainly take a look at the charter and get back to
Yeah.
you, and I've got it here and I'm happy to
Yeah.
do that right now, but I haven't memorized it, so
In the case of and I'm going out on a limb here, in the case of a charter, if you want to make a change to your charter, it's the General Assembly.
Right.
I believe it's an ordinance in Stanton, not part of the charter. So we are elected to cast a vote in our role as elected officials. If we do have the conflict of interest, whether we vote or not vote, if we have a conflict of interest, we do not vote, we recuse, we step down as we've been doing. None of that changes. But if we have an ordinance that says, if you don't, but you feel you still have one and you ethically don't feel comfortable voting, does our ordinance require you to vote as Stanton does? I don't know the answer to that, but we'll find that out. And I don't know that we've had that situation come up before. In most instances, I think if people felt like someone had a conflict of interest, a council member would contact another council member and say, I think you have a conflict of interest due to this issue. a spouse's employment, your employment, or whatever circumstances may prevail. And then if it's not reconciled with the councils, folks may seek the opinion of the attorney to make sure or give us guidance from that standpoint.
My personal thoughts are that I don't see a reason to change our code of ethics. I see the public trust is important. I trust my colleagues. I do understand that there are certain instances where we each bring different talents or maybe lack thereof talents in my case, but we bring perspectives, and that's why we've been elected. And in certain situations where there's an appearance of a conflict, we have something to offer. And we have been told previously by our city attorney that we can excuse ourselves, join the public, and we have every right as every member of the public during a public hearing or during citizen comment to have 3 minutes, step up to the microphone and say, I'm a member of the public, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a citizen of Lexington, and here's what I have to say on this topic. And then we sit back down. Everything else still is in play as far as us not participating. We can't have private conversations. We don't vote. And so I still feel that if I have something really important to say about an issue, but there's an appearance of a conflict of interest, that you all would hold me to if you believe there's an appearance, because you're the judge and jury of the appearance, I'll step down and I have no problem addressing you as a member of the public. And so I don't see any reason to change our code of ethics.
I will say part of what brought this up was we've had a couple of city attorneys and different city managers, and we had a previous city manager that sort of weaponized this and decided somewhat, I felt arbitrarily, when people should and should not vote. For instance, if your employer makes a position on dam removal, are you truly conflicted? If you feel you are and you might be retaliated, I have no problems if you want to recuse yourself. But people were told that they had to recuse themselves because their employer took a stance on it, even though it didn't meet any of these criteria whatsoever. And so that's where I want clarity. I don't want it to be left up to a city manager or some person to determine whether you should participate or not. And we've had several instances where I look back, looking through the rules, and it's like, that person did not have to recuse themselves. And I feel like you do. I like to hear what everybody has to say on a topic. I don't want people to recuse themselves unless they truly do have a conflict of interest. Then yes, we need to recuse ourselves. No problem with that whatsoever. But it's when you get into some of these areas where somebody thinks there's a perception of appearance of a conflict of interest, I want that defined.
So in that situation, though, with the American dams being created for the one purpose of, buying the city of Lexington Dam, I participated for 6 or 8 months in that saga until a letter was sent by my employer that said, we'd really like for the dam to stay. And then I stepped down and I no longer participated after I had been an active member asking tons of questions. At that time, you're exactly right. The law said I didn't have a conflict of interest, but there was an appearance and you were the judge and jury. I could have said, I'm going to stay up here. Is everyone okay with that? Are any of you going to ring me up on charges and censure me publicly? And I could have taken the temperature of city council and you could have said, you know what? Yeah, get out of here, go sit there. Or you could have said, no, we know where you're coming from on this. And it's important. That could happen. And in city council, we just need to feel confident to ask.
Except that we did, there were similar things, and when we did have an attorney say there's an appearance of a conflict of interest. It was based on the code of ethics. It wasn't based on that. So I agree with what you're saying in theory, except that hasn't always played out, because when any of us hear a city attorney saying you need to do this or that, we're going to do it. And actually that's what what the advice is in the preamble to our handbook is, if there's any question, you go to the city attorney. And we have relied on several city attorneys. It's when you get one that goes more by their personal interpretation of that the code of ethics. That's what concerns me. I don't want that vagueness in there. I want clarity on it.
I have a question for the city attorney. Do you think that leaving the word appearance and kind of that line in there increases the chance of litigation in the future. If somebody were to argue, hey, I don't have an appearance, and this not necessarily this city council, but a future city council, because we need to think about how, things are going to play out down the road as well. Do you think that, anybody would potentially try to litigate over that? Is that something that's possible to litigate over if the board or the council censured somebody and somebody said, I don't have an appearance? You think, is that something that somebody could or would take to court, in your opinion?
I suppose it's possible that a creative attorney would try to argue that that invalidated the action, but my expectation would be that that would not hold up. I would
Okay.
think that this is your own policy, this is your guideline, and if at the end of the day you enacted an ordinance that complied with Title 15.2 and what's required through that, and you didn't violate the Conflicts of Interest Act, that your action would ultimately be upheld. But yes, you could it could be an argument that somebody could make in some litigation and you would have to defend it. But I think it would probably withstand at the end of the day.
So is this giving us an opportunity to rewrite and then come back and massage it at all?
Absolutely. I mean, it's for discussion. Again, we're not adopting anything in the work session. If we want to make some changes, we certainly can. If there's one proposal to do so, I'm not sure exactly how all of council hasn't spoken, so I don't know how all of council feels about the requested changes that Leslie's made. But any other changes would be welcomed as we sort through this and come up with perhaps a better document or a document for the future. I don't know that one's better or worse. The thing that I look at, obviously we're all held to a high standard, and I look at this council and don't anticipate the code of ethics will ever come into question, because all of you hold yourself to a high standard and perform your homework and prepared for the work that is city council. Citizens don't always like the decisions that council makes, and that just comes with the territory. That's more political than ethical. But I applaud council for looking at this and having the discussion and sorting through. But again, I don't see how it diminishes the public trust with any meaningful changes that might be made, or the Conflict of Interest Act is still the reigning law. We are a Dillon rule state, so it's not anything that our code of ethics would be impactful at the state level, because it's not recognized by the state. And during the session yesterday, I asked the attorney who was leading the certification for conflict of interest and asked about local code of ethics. And he said that the city of Stanton does not have one. They just embrace the conflict of interest, and that most municipalities embrace that. So the fact that we have one, whether it says specifically what Leslie wants removed or not, is a higher standard in and of itself. He said those that do have them more are of the vein of being respectful and civil, which seems to go without saying, but in some municipalities, clearly it's needs to be a signed agreement.
I will say in the clients that I have, this type of document is the exception rather than the rule.
Right. So we're already holding ourselves to a higher standard than most of Virginia. And most.
I want to go
Virginia.
on record. My turn.
Yes, sir.
All right. I'd like to go on record saying I'm in support of keeping the code of ethics that we have now as it is. I think that we go to a slightly higher standard than the state requires. And the appearance, the question about having the appearance of a conflict is the key question. And here in this town, we have two major employers, and typically on our boards and commissions, the members are populated with employees or relatives of employees of those two major institutions. And on our recent zoning on the W&L matter, for example, 3 of the 6 opted to step down, and I supported all of that as well, and continue to. I think we're playing it safe in this town to have our code of ethics that goes that little notch above what the state requires. The state is okay with us doing that. The state's not okay with us doing anything less than what the state requires, and we're okay there. We're good there in there. And I think we're good with the conflict of interest as it is now.
Can I ask that you define some of these terms in there then? The other problem that it brings up is some people were not required to recuse themselves. And we had this in Planning Commission, and not everybody who had either were employed or had a spouse employed by Washington and Lee recused themselves. And there was nothing wrong because they didn't violate the state code, but it causes confusion and it caused some derision for other people to make comments about it. So I don't agree. I mean, I'll just say, I don't agree with keeping that in there and that there's no problem. And we have had council members in the past try to weaponize this and have wanted to censure people based on what their perceived appearance is. So it's not always as nice as we tend to be, as far as I will ask all of you if I should recuse myself. We've had other people who said, I'm going to tell you, you're wrong, and try to get the rest of council behind their back to recuse them. I thought it led to
Well,
ridiculous.
isn't it so that recommendations from the city manager and from the city attorney as to how the conflict of interest applies are just that? The decision is made by the actual council member themselves. And that is how we operate currently. And I find it to be a good way.
I don't think I will personally always ask the city attorney if there is a conflict. And if the city attorney says yes, I will recuse myself. And the problem we've, again, as I stated, gotten into the past is, well, there's these wiggle words there's this vagueness in the city's code of ethics. So we've had an attorney that would expand upon that and say, you probably should recuse yourself based on the code of ethics. Our last attorney said, that's really just kind of a general guideline. You can if you want, but you don't have to, and you're fine with the state. That, I like that guidance, but being told before in situations that, that appearance, you probably have that appearance, or not me necessarily, but somebody else has that appearance, and that person recused themselves. And I do think it diminishes the discussion. I like to hear what everybody has to say unless there's a true conflict of interest.
My concern is I generally think that less ambiguity is better. And for a lot of the reasons stated. Additionally, I think in the future, I think this council will work well together, and but you never know what can happen in the future. And let's say, a future council goes ahead and says somebody has an appearance of a conflict, and for whatever reason that person doesn't agree, it leads to litigation. That's city resources, that taxpayer resources that we're going to be spending, defending that lawsuit, and or the city attorney's time doing that as well. I think just having a more clearly defined code is most likely the way we should go.
I think using terminology that comes directly from the state code should be the preferred terminology to use, rather than things that we're coming up with on our own. I think that will help keep from leading us astray, and keep us on track with what we're supposed to be doing based on the state code.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander.
All this discussion provides some clarity for me. It's helpful to understand that our code would not hold up in litigation, that it all really does distill down to state act of law. I've always used our code as a guideline on whether or not I should recuse myself based on the appearance of a conflict. If it's a state closure or a street closure, I don't feel any conflict of taking that action of of closing a street for a Washington Lee event. My wife works for Washington Lee as David's does. Her program is funded by one of the largest donors of the university. I feel conflicted if we have decisions to make that impact the university on a grander scale that might result, extremely unlikely, in a potential retaliation. And again, it's extremely unlikely, but it's not zero. So in major issues regarding the university, I feel it is my responsibility for clarity to recuse myself. And if someone on this council decides that's out of bounds, that I should be sitting up here and voting on that issue, we can consult the city attorney, whoever that may be, and come to a consensus and legal decision on whether or not my participation is the better thing to do. As everyone else I've served with on council has held themselves to a higher standard, and that's why I like the code that we have. But for the purpose of whenever I'm up here making a decision, I'm always keeping on my radar, if we go to court, what's our exposure? And if my decision increases that exposure as a result of whatever feelings I have, that is a slippery slope. So I've always tried to maintain as much logic and lack of or no ambiguity in guidance of how I make my decisions on the actions of this council. So what does that say regarding our code? If it doesn't have legal standing, it's still helpful to have it as a guide. But in regards to, if it comes to litigation, it defaults to state code. And it's helpful to hear what our interim city attorney has had to say regarding that. So thank you. That helps.
I think additionally, part of what for further discussion on a different night may be the process for how we approach if we feel there is a conflict of interest, because a couple of things have been said. It's the individual making that decision, could be a peer. We have our referee and the attorney. But to get some consistency, I think as a unit, and my goal always for council to speak as one voice, where do we draw the line on that $5,000 compensation? So where Chuck's wife works at Washington Lee and makes more than $5,000, is anything related to Washington and Lee, including a street closure, is he precluded from participating? I'm not sure how to discern that in what circumstances, but we may come up with a little more clarity as a unit, as a working council, to also provide some clarity to our boards and commissions.
And that almost leads to the question, well, where did the $5,000 number come from? And
Our friends at the state.
well, I know, but how did the state determine?
It used to be 10,000, they lowered it.
Really?
And the
Well, that's
street closure,
interesting.
hypothetically speaking.
Yes.
It would not impact solely Washington and Lee, so I wouldn't think you would have to.
Right.
Right.
Understand that, so.
That's
And that, I mean, just, that's also what has confused people, thinking that certain things violate the state conflict of interest when they don't, because there's been such a broad interpretation of what a conflict of interest is. So again, I like having it being less ambiguous, stick with the state code, but if you feel conflicted, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem if you recuse yourself.
Well, thank you all for this discussion. I don't know that our city attorney has greater clarity on changes, but we will revisit this topic, perhaps another work session and or council meeting in the future, but we'll certainly advertise it appropriately. The other items on our list, on our agenda, conflict of interest, financial disclosure forms. Janie does not want to fine you. However, she's obligated to if you do not turn it in by February 1st. And for members of the public, everyone elected here and on many of our boards and commissions are required to complete financial disclosures for any potential conflicts of interest. And yes, Janie would like to have those no later than the 16th for her processing. Some people already had theirs in. Congratulations and thank you. But if you do not have it in by February 1st, Janie is obligated to fine you. I think the first offense is $250 and it ratchets up after that. So you don't have to disclose that when you turn it in, but you will have to pay the fine. The other is the policy for public comments and behaviors for Lexington City Council meetings. That was part of your packet. Unless there are any objections, we will approve what we've been asking the community to do in the past, which is to sign up to speak. Yes, Mr. Smith.
I don't have the language right in front of me, but it says the public must sign up to be recognized for speaking. I would feel more comfortable if that is changed to should.
The that would be the first bullet. Speakers should sign up on the sign up sheet at the entrance.
Yes.
Okay.
I've also had concern over the years where a speaker must state their address publicly.
Mhm.
I just don't like that. It's put certain members of the public at potential risk. And I don't think that this body would ever want to do that. So maybe that could also be should, but must, if we're talking about this policy, I'd like there to be wiggle room on that.
I would too. I've mentioned this before and it didn't go anywhere, but it does put some people at risk, or they might feel that way when it may not be, but they may feel that way. And that means a lot. If the person feels unsafe, then we need to pay attention to that.
Is there?
I'd ask for the city attorney to weigh in on that language.
Making that change is certainly fine. I would say the purpose for the asking for the address is so that you know that you're hearing from a resident of the city as opposed to a resident of the county, for example. And so that if you have a zoning issue in a particular part of the city, you know you're hearing from somebody from that part of the city who may be impacted by that zoning decision or whatever the situation may be. So you may want to replace it with, confirm they are a resident of the city or state the area of the city in which they live, something to that nature.
Could they perhaps give their address to the clerk?
If that information would flow through to you eventually, I suppose, but I don't know if it has the same effect as if you wanted to hear it where they generally reside.
I think if they said are a resident of Lexington or not a resident of Lexington, that would be sufficient. But also let us know, that they're a citizen.
I guess my question is if the address were shared with the clerk, which is eventually shared with council, does that become part of the public record and kind of short circuit the purpose of should instead of must?
It would end, it would end up as a public record, certainly, which would be FOIA-able. I don't know how easily accessible it would be, but it would be subject to FOIA, certainly.
Oh, boy.
So recommendations on the first two bullets to change must to should. Any objection to that? Very good.
Well, speaker must be recognized by the mayor
Mhm.
and should state his or her name and address to the clerk. You must recognize them. But, and again, we live in a small community. When someone is coming up and they usually make it known if the reason that they are speaking is because how they're tied to an issue. And so them saying their street address or something that's nice, but that's usually shared if that's pertinent to what they're commenting.
We shouldn't make stating their name optional. They should state their name.
Speaker must be recognized by mayor and then state his or her name and whether,
Should
and then must state his or her name and
Provide.
provide whether they're a resident of Lexington,
Lexington city limits.
Lexington city limits.
I also recall one of the reasons for getting someone's address is for follow-up purposes. You know, if the city manager says, if we refer to the city manager and there's discussion for them to follow up, if we can't find them,
Could we say and are welcome to provide their address at the end of that? So
speaker must be recognized by the mayor and then should state his or her name and
whether they're a
and may
resident of-
provide their address to the clerk.
but we also want to say that put the city, like we want them to know that they're part of the city limits, even if they don't want to provide their address. So we can kind of work that in there on some level.
We'll work to updating it. Last updated 1/4/18, but with those recommendations in the spirit of what we're trying to write there, we'll lean on the city manager and attorney to come up with some excellent wordsmithing for us to consider at our next meeting. Thank you all. Good points and all the reasons we have our organizational meeting. The only other pieces that I wanted to share and remind as we start a new year, my goal for council as we work with the city attorney and our other employee, city manager, is for council to be able to speak with one voice. Doesn't have to be a unified voice, but each person calling the city manager or the city attorney and asking for different things is not always productive. We need to be consistent and speak with one voice. It would be my ambition. Again, embracing clarity and making things much more productive for our staff, giving them clear guidance from that standpoint. And I always like to share with folks my perception. You don't have to embrace it, but I encourage you to. Having grown up in the Presbyterian church, the church leadership, whenever there's a vote that's taken, if it's not unanimous, the majority rules. And whatever is adopted, all of the church leadership is to step behind and move forward on. It's sometimes contentious, the things that we have to deal with, and it's not always unanimous. And if it's not, I think it's incumbent upon us to get behind it and move it forward. And the personal example I'll give is Mark Reed I was talking with, and I congratulated him on being effective in moving forward. We will be electing our school board. And he said, I thought you were against it. Why are you congratulating me? I said, you worked hard, you got it accomplished. That's the vote, and I'm behind it. So I'm here to support that in whatever decisions this council makes. I think that's the mode of operation. Again, don't have to, but encourage you to embrace the vote and working relationships in that capacity. So I think that's all we had to cover for the work session. We've run over a little bit. I'll give council the opportunity for a 5-minute break. And members of the public, if you're just arriving or arrived in the past 10 or 15 minutes, we had a 6:15 work session to review our code of ethics and a recommendation on that, as well as appointment to committees and assignments for school board, city council. And that was the purpose of that meeting, and we will start our regular meeting by Verizon on my phone at 7:08. It's now 7:03, so we will stand adjourned and reconvene at 7:08. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Time flies when you're having fun, and that was a fun 5 minutes. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to call the first meeting of the Lexington City Council for 2023 to order. Thank you all again for being here, and I'm sure it was everyone's New Year's resolution to get out and get active in city government, and I hope that we'll see you all year long. We enjoy your presence and participation. First order of business, if you could all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much. Next item is consideration of the agenda. Obviously, it was sent prior. Any questions or concerns on the agenda? Otherwise, if there's no objection, we will approve the agenda as presented. Next item, public hearings. Public hearing and consideration to review the request of Echelon Resources. Thank you, sir. Inc. to allow multifamily community consisting of up to 62 dwelling units of new construction at 406 Spotswood Drive. And I would ask the city manager to invite Arnie to get us started. Come on, Arnie.
Good evening to you all. We do have a request for a conditional use permits for multifamily units in RLC zoning district for the property that is located at 406 Spotswood Drive. The applicant had a choice between RLC and a conditional use permit for multifamily units, or an opportunity to also rezone the property residential multifamily to accomplish the apartments that are desired. And the applicant chose to come forward with conditional use permit, and that's what's been advertised for public hearing this evening.
Arnie, I'm going to pause you for just a second. Folks are having difficulty hearing you, so if you can swallow the mic there.
It's too short. I'll start over.
Pretty please.
Okay.
Go ahead and lean on down. I know
We have a request for a conditional use permit for apartments. The applicant had the opportunity to either request the apartments through a conditional use permits in the current RLC zoning district or through a rezoning to the RM residential multifamily zoning district. And the applicant chose the conditional use permit, and that has been advertised for a public hearing this evening. The request is or consists of up to 62 apartments with related amenities and at least 84 parking spaces. Maximum building height will not exceed 45 feet. We do have 3 full stories of height measured at the front entrance and a basement story facing Spotswood Drive. First page of your staff report includes a photograph of the existing conditions. The second page gives you a location map and zoning map. The property is zoned again is residential light commercial. The RARA building and the medical offices to the south are also zoned RLC. Across the street, we have the cemetery, which is parks and open space zoned. And we have a number or handful of properties that are to the north and west that are zoned R1. Those are single family dwellings. Bottom of that page, we have a concept plan where you see the footprint of the proposed structure is shoved furthest to the east, closest to the RARA building, which provides more separation to the single family zoning districts, which is the least intensive use in that area. And please interrupt me if you have any questions. On the next page, the applicant proffered 11 conditions. I'm not going to go through those unless you have any questions. We did provide the bottom of that third page, the RLC intent and purpose. I'm not going to go through that except for to read the one sentence, the first full sentence on the next page, which says the regulations applicable to this district provide that single family dwellings and multiple family dwellings, such as apartment houses, townhouses, garden apartments, et cetera, may be developed in appropriate areas well located with respect to major roads, shopping facilities, and employment centers. And I would maintain that we are on a major road with this property. We are close to shopping facilities, even within walking distance. and close to employment centers because the hospital is one of our major employment centers and it is quite close. Comprehensive plan designation, the property has a mixed-use neighborhood designation as well as an opportunity area designation. Mixed-use neighborhoods are appropriate for higher density residential uses such as apartments and townhouses, and also for light commercial uses such as offices, financial institutions, and boutique retail. Infill is expected to be focused within an opportunity area, and development proposals should incorporate a high-quality architectural design, which I suspect we'll be talking about more shortly, and provide gradual transitions to surrounding land uses using design features such as setbacks, height, steps downs, and landscaping. Any questions thus far?
No,
For
sir.
building
No, sir.
building height, we do have a slight hiccup, or not for building height. Building height is 45 feet, and there's a calculation provided in that paragraph, and the proposal currently does meet the building height as defined in our zoning ordinance. Off-street parking also meets our criteria. Density calculation is where we have a slight hiccup. In our lot requirements table, we have a calculation for lot area, and we have a separate calculation for lot width. The proposal meets the lot area requirements, and that's the math there is laid out for you, but it is a little bit shy on the lot width requirement. Typically, through a conditional use permit, you cannot approve what in essence is a variance to the zoning criteria. But I would maintain that since we have two different requirements, both getting at density, that if it were only one and it did not meet, then we could not override that. But here we have a bit of a discrepancy in that we meet the lot area requirements, but it does not meet the lot width. And I'd also maintain that lot width in and of itself isn't the best criteria to use, in my opinion, again, for an apartment complex to see whether or not it is sufficient, or if apartments can be located on a property just because of lot width. If the lot width was deep and not as wide, the apartments still fit on it, in my opinion, and therefore it's something that you can approve. To further that point, this is a legislative act. You have a good bit of latitude in the legislative act. And then you also have the criteria, which are next on your staff report, which we have the same criteria for every conditional use permit. And then for what it's worth, I put in italics what my opinion is of each of those criteria.
And on that one, on the density calculation, that calculation is based on the number of units in there, not bedrooms.
Right.
So even if it was fewer units, more bedrooms, essentially the same number of people, then you could calculate it to meet the requirement, but it really would be the same size building.
Right.
So it's sort of,
Footage wise,
right,
yes.
it doesn't,
And to further
make a
that
lot of
also,
sense.
that was a major talking point during the planning commission discussion, and they also directed staff to relook at or reevaluate that and bring it forward for a zoning text amendment to see if that lot width requirement needs to be addressed or changed. So if there's nothing further on the criteria that you have for all your conditional use permits, staff does make a recommendation for approval. Planning commission makes a recommendation for approval, but it was a split vote of 4-2. The two votes were, in generally speaking, and we do have the minutes for you attached to the packet, were because of that sort of hiccup with the lot width requirements, that it did not absolutely meet every single criteria in the zoning. And that was, I think, the major reason for the 2 no votes. But there is some nuance in that, and that could be picked up in the minutes. That's all I have for presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Arnie. Members of council have any questions for planning director?
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
In and this goes back to intent and purpose, just so we're all clear, especially me. The definition of a household unit. And that's why I'm asking. So the top of, I guess it's the first line in this, after the page break, of intent and purpose of residential light commercial constitute for unrelated individuals authorized to constitute a household unit. Okay, I just answered my own question. It broke up, page break, disregard.
Good work.
The second question is, how is the lot area minimum, how is that calculated or justified based on the footprint of the building? Like the minimum lot size is based on, is that just a state operative, or like, so if you're going to build a building this big in this zoning, the lot has to be this big. How is that this big determined?
That is just what we have in our zoning code.
Okay,
And
all right.
different places, localities will have just a flat number, no more than 20 dwelling units per acre. They might say gross, they might say net. But and this is a carryover, this wasn't addressed in the 2016, 2017 update. So this is something that we've had in our code for a while that calculates the area based on the number of units and so many square feet for the first 4 units, and then so many for the additional ones, and then same thing for the lot width, that there is a lot width requirement. And a lot width to me makes a lot more sense for a row house or a townhouse. You have to have so many feet. Maybe you shouldn't say public street, maybe you should say on a driveway. But it doesn't make terribly much sense to me in the sense that if you had 600 feet this way and it fits, but what if you just turned it 90 degrees and it had 600 feet in depth? It's still the same lot area.
Right.
I would think that the number of units being the same could fit on the property.
And I'm glad Councilmember Strawn brought up that point of, if you have the same number of people, but just a different number of units, you could change the frontage are almost arbitrarily. And I have a that's hard to resolve. And that's all I had now.
Ms. Alexander.
Ernie, I know that there is a formula for determining the number of parking spaces, per multifamily complex. But is there anything in the ADA compliance about the number of handicap parking spaces? Having only 4 doesn't seem to be enough.
This is not the answer that you would like, but we would evaluate that more closely at site plan. We know that we have enough space now for the required total number of parking spaces. But when we come around to site plan, I think it's Public Works, they would take a closer look to see if it's 4 or if it's 5 or if it's 6 or what the actual number needs to be. My guess is the applicant did their homework and they are showing 4, and that probably is what the code requires.
Okay,
But we would review that at site plan,
thank you.
which would be the next step after a conditional use permit.
Got it.
With it being private property, once it's developed, if the owner wanted to designate more spaces as handicap parking, there'd be no problem with that. They wouldn't need to appeal to the city. It's their property, correct?
Correct. I was hoping you weren't going to ask if they all of a sudden took away some of the handicap
Yeah.
parking, but certainly they have the ability to go above the requirement.
Very good. Thank you. I can't tell if your body language is
Well,
something on your mind that's got to come out.
these are questions I don't know if you have the answers to. I'm curious about the Hampton Inn Call Alto property, the size of that property, how many keys are made for, how many rooms are there?
Lexington House.
And Lexington House, is that zoned RM or RLC, and how many?
I did look up that one. It's 2 acres, a little bit over 2 acres, is about the same lot size, and it had over 70 rooms is what, when it came to planning for permitting. So it was a comparable size building, and it's 3 stories as well.
Those were the 2 that I was thinking of.
One thing that I'd asked Kate to do prior to the planning commission, she did, and I forgot to take it to the meeting, was a comparison of other multifamily units is what I think you're getting to. I'm sorry, I didn't make enough copies. Spotswood property, 62 units on 2.3 acres is a 26.2 units per acre. Lexington House is 33.9 units per acre. Windermere is 11.9 units per acre. General's Retreat existing is 11.7. General's Retreat approved, because they got a site plan approved, is 26.1. Mountain View Terrace, 8.1. The unnamed condos at 303 White Street would be 12 units to the acre. McLaughlin Place, which is a little bit further down, or McLaughlin Street, is 9 units per acre. 308 McLaughlin, 10 units per acre, and Borden Commons, 7 units per acre. That helps.
When we're working through this, if you can distribute that. I mean, not now, but potentially in a hard copy.
I'll do.
And I believe the Hampton Inn has roughly 86 in the hotel and 10 in the house, if my memory serves correct.
Thank you.
And perhaps it'd be advantageous that that's information you could share with Janie that she can add to our Echelon webpage, or Spotswood webpage rather. Other members for council have questions? Thank you, Arnie. Before I open the public comment, I have a prepared statement, and also want to acknowledge that there were 3 folks that emailed the city clerk. Those will not be read tonight, but they will be included in our minutes. 2 of them can be found in local publications, and comments relative to the Spotswood property. Our agenda for tonight includes a public hearing regarding the Spotswood property and moving forward. Like you, council members, I have heard from many folks who do not embrace the pictures posted at the Planning Commission meeting. I propose a process to effectively communicate and collaborate to achieve the goal of increasing the housing stock available in our city with a facility that fits with our historic values and the character of the surrounding neighborhood. Over the past 2 years, council has worked hard to listen, to evaluate, and to make choices for our city that include selling the Piovano building to RARA and selecting Echelon as the developer. During the discussion, I suggested that we were selecting the developer and council would look at the building to be constructed at a later date. Tonight, as we hold the public hearing, I also plan to continue this public hearing until February 2nd. This will give time to appoint a committee to meet with Echelon to discuss the building plans. I want to appoint Leslie Strawn and Marilyn Alexander as the Spotswood Building Committee to meet with Echelon to discuss what will be built. During the month of January and longer if necessary, I asked this committee to meet with Echelon to discuss the final design for council to consider, along with the CUP. It's imperative that council members provide guidance to this committee to reach the goal of building an apartment building that enhances and complements our historic city and the surrounding neighborhood as well. We've heard you in the checkout line, and we've had phone calls and discussions on the street. So I hope that that's well received, but more importantly, we're at the moment of having the public comment and public hearing. So I would like to open the public hearing and invite folks to speak. I will call on folks as they've signed up. If you have not signed up and would like to speak, there will be a time and I'll gladly acknowledge you afterwards. But first, Margaret Robertson, if you could make your way as you approach. As with all of our public comments, let me read a brief statement. For all those that will be speaking tonight, ask you to come and stand at the podium and state your name and address for the clerk for the record, if you're comfortable doing so, the address. Make your comments to the council as a whole. Please be brief and state your position and provide facts. Providing written statements and or supporting materials to the clerk for distribution to the council and the city manager. Debate is prohibited. We ask you to speak clearly as we want to hear what you have to say. And anticipating or conforming with our adopted rules, we provide 3 minutes. As you, if you approach that, I will alert you with my homemade 30-second and also 15-second warning and stop you at the 3 minutes. Anyone who's speaking on behalf of an organization, we do extend the speaking period to 5 minutes. And your 3 minutes has not started, but Margaret, you have the floor.
245 Denny Lane.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think it's a shame that this project has done nothing but highlight the disregard city council holds for the people of Lexington. The intent of city council from the beginning was to destroy a facility that provides services to the poor citizens in our community in order to provide housing for wealthy college students on land that was intended for and deeded to the Stonewall Jackson Cemetery. To add insult to injury during all of this, you're trying to remove restrictions for conflicts of interest in the Code of Ethics. Let me remind you, City Council is bound to follow the conditions set forth in the comprehensive plan. The project proposed by Echelon Resources does not meet city requirements for housing and land use from the plan, where affordable housing is referenced 199 times. Nor does the project meet requirements outlined on page 13 of the City Council handbook that states Lexington is home to about 7,000 residents with a median income of just $35,000 a year. Encouraging and promoting the development of affordable housing is a must. According to Mr. Gaskins, the rental rates for this project will be between $1,500 and $1,700 a month for a two-bedroom unit, which means the clerk of court cannot afford to live here, and that's one of the best paying jobs in the city. This is a construction project where every shovel of dirt, utility, nail, screw, paint color, and blade of grass is designated on drawings with corresponding project management documents that must be followed. Nowhere in the findings of the Planning Commission for the conditional use permit are we giving references or evidence where this project meets the requirements. The commission can only provide us with the staff believes. That's not good enough. Condition 1A of the CUP application has not been met. 2019 traffic study shows the intersection of Spotswood and Route 60 is the second busiest intersection in Lexington, with an average daily traffic of 13,000 vehicles. The traffic incident map shows the intersection of Houston and Spotswood is prone to traffic accidents. Evidence of safety must be provided. Condition 1C of the CUP application has definitely not been met. There's no doubt this project is a conflict with affordable housing principles of the comprehensive plan. It is definitely not compatible with Lexington's historic and architectural character and is in stark opposition, to the principles of the historic district design guidelines that impact the adjoining lots. There are 10 planning objectives for opportunity areas on page 87 of the comprehensive plan. The staff can only show that this project fills only one of those objectives. Again, the opinion and the beliefs of the staff that the conditions are met are completely inadequate. There is no evidence that condition 1D of the CUP application has been met. The minutes of the IDA from October 26, 2020 discusses bottlenecks in the sewer line flow for the city. An issue in the Diamond Hill area directly affects the Spotswood property. Have these issues been resolved? Did you share that information with Mr. Gaskins? There's quite a bit about this project that is highly questionable, including the city manager's prior relationship with Echelon Resources in Halifax County.
Thank you, Ms. Robertson. Next speaker, D. Joyce Hayes. And on deck is Ben Grigsby. Welcome, D. Thank you for being with us this evening.
I'll reintroduce myself.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, my name is D. Joyce Hayes, and I'm here as the president of the Historic Lexington Foundation, representing them. They are housed in the city of Lexington. I am not, but I hope you'll take that into consideration. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you tonight about the Echelon proposal. I want to just take a moment to give you a personal opinion about something. I was born and grew up in Lexington, but I moved away in the mid-60s and only retired back to Lexington in 2014. While even as a youngster, I appreciated the beauty and the history of Lexington, I must tell you that in the 50 years that I've been gone before I came back, the improvements to Lexington, the appearance of downtown in particular, have been really just transformational almost. Those transformations, if you will, have been through the efforts of city government. They've also been through the efforts of individuals and organizations like HLF. Even though people may jokingly refer to us as the Hysterical Lexington Commission, I want to say that we are proud to have played a part in some of this transformational effort. And even though it is HLF's main purpose to preserve Lexington's historic architecture. We don't expect that everything built in the city is going to look like it was built in the 19th century. That is an unreal expectation and not one that we harbor. We do believe, however, that the building at any development, any building or any building development in the city should blend in appropriately. Now, while the city chose not to accept the Spotswood Collaborative as the developer, HLF strongly believes that some of the ideas that their plan contains, some of the qualities should be seriously considered by the city and maintained by the city. And that among those would be a lower scale building or buildings with appropriately concealed on-site parking, not out front. Bioretention, stormwater management, well-developed landscape plan. So far, we've seen none of that. Echelon's proposed big box plan has none of those qualities as far as we've been able to tell, and is totally inappropriate for that site. Echelon's website states that it creates, quote, high quality spaces that a community can be proud of, end quote. To be perfectly blunt, the plan as pictured and described in the News Gazette several weeks ago is anything but that, and it's in fact just plain ugly. It is definitely not something that this community will be proud of if it is built as proposed. The 2.3 acre Spotswood Drive site is the last significant parcel in the city of St. Louis suitable for development. It is physically very prominent. It is literally in the backyards of many Lexington residents, and it's highly visible from many points all over town. The development of the site does need to be one that we can all be proud of. So on behalf of the Historic Lexington Foundation, I encourage, in fact, I urge the council to deny Echelon's ultimate plan for that site and to require it to come back with a more appropriate development plan, one which is in size and scale, use of parking, landscaping, and all of those things, much more attractive, much more appropriate, much more consistent with the overall appearance of our beautiful city. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. And thank you for your service to HLF. You make Royster Lyle proud, and the work that HLF has done since it started, I believe, in the 1960s and 70s is dramatic indeed, especially downtown. Grateful for those that came before us and offered so much. Next speaker, Ben Grigsby, and on deck is Sarah Clayton.
Good evening. Ben Grigsby, 111 Lee Avenue, Lexington. I'm pleased to be here with you tonight. Not least as when speaking with over the holidays with friends and neighbors, they scoffed at my plan to come back early from a New Year's holiday to attend this public meeting, most saying, why bother, Ben? Everyone already knows the outcome. It'll be form over substance, the same way this has been too often on this deal from the get-go. It's a done deal. Save your time for other things. Well, I'm here because I'm praying that this is not a done deal. Other than a tidal wave of voices, which saved the Piovano building against the entreaties initially of Echelon and the city manager, my view is that way too often the voices of the public have not been really paid attention to. Too much weight's been given to, excuse me, to outside voices, lots of closed sessions. There's just been a lack of sense of transparency to create real trust in this whole process. And some people felt left feeling marginalized. I've had an awful lot of comments to that effect. So now we're at the final hurdle. And dare I say, you have a chance to shape this unique city asset into something that is both economically viable, both for the city in terms of revenues, to the developer in terms of his returns for his investors, but also as HLF just have talked about, it's something we can be proud of. It's going to address, it does address one of the three housing needs. which is market rate, but affordable housing and senior housing are not addressed. I hope like hell that y'all will pay attention to that aggressively in the new year. But here's where I am now. What I'd really like you to do is require a reduction in the size and scale of this project. In doing so, you'll be remembered as a council that really protected a neighborhood, and enhanced and protected the historic character of this amazing city, who listened to your citizens and made tough decisions, yet at the same time acting prudently in terms of revenues, returns, economic growth, but also the character of Lexington. Bluntly, and at the risk of maybe damaging some friendships, I believe y'all as elected officials have a real duty to represent your citizens. And so what I'm asking you to do now is step back and recreate an alternative plan for the development of this project, because I really would love to be able to tell all those naysayers, the done deal naysayers, they're wrong. Thank you.
Thank you for cutting your vacation short and spending time with us and sharing those thoughts. Well stated and perfectly clear. Sarah Clayton, and on deck is Lisa Tracy. Welcome, and remind Sarah, if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Sarah Clayton. I live in Rockbridge County.
Thank you.
Back in the 1960s, my father, Donald Clayton, got with a group of people. The few of them are still alive, and formed the historic Lexington Foundation. At that time, the Alexander Withrow House was about to be pulled down. That's where Hayward's is today. And when I look at the picture in the paper of what is proposed for Spotswood, it has nothing to do with what the people of Lexington rallied around the historic Lexington Foundation and proposed for Lexington's future. It's a future that everybody has appreciated. It brings in tourists, it brings in jobs, and it shouldn't be changed. It's a formula that works. I just would repeat everything that Ben and Dee have said. It's inappropriate for our town. Aesthetically, it's appalling. And I would like to think that maybe council could start extending the influence of Historic Lexington to be an architectural review board that could cover the whole historic town of Lexington. But I think it's imperative that we step back, as Ben said, and look at this project and follow the rules that have been set in this town by people who've lived here a long time. I would suggest giving it back to the Spotswood collaboration. I was out of the country when this came in, and I saw it in the papers when I got back. It was complete. It never occurred to me that they wouldn't go with the Spotswood collaboration. It was an attractive design, and I feel like it fit in with what we've been trying to do in this town since I was a child. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Clayton. Lisa Tracy and Annalisa Fitzgerald on deck. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Greetings, council members. You are our council. You are
Lisa, I
my-
encourage you to speak up and into that microphone.
Okay.
Thank
Is this
you.
better?
Yes.
Okay. You are our council. You are my council, and I have voted for all of you, in some cases more than once, though not at the same time in the same election. As such, I can tell you that I speak for many of your constituents, as you may have mentioned when you cited the Kroger's lines and the other places where you all have been accosted, that we continue to be baffled and utterly dismayed by our continuing engagement with the developer chosen for the Spotswood property. The horse appears to be out of the barn for so many things we would have preferred to see for this property, including most recently the decision to engage with the local development group that had a much better idea of what our community needs and what our community actually is. Among questions that remain unanswered are why the city ever became involved with this developer to begin with, dating back to his ill-conceived plan for the water tower property, but also including whether we have seriously studied what plunking a large apartment building down in this location is going to do to the traffic flow on a street that is actually a major thoroughfare, a shortcut to downtown for anyone who lives in the south end of town, and a street whose short length includes the hospital, the food pantry, a school, a hotel, a fraternity, and access to at least two significant neighborhoods. One of the questions that Sarah Clayton just raised was something I wondered, which is why the Centerville and Green Hill neighborhoods are not included in our historic downtown. Was it because when that historic downtown was designated, was it because they were Black neighborhoods primarily? I think that, as Sarah said, this is something that needs to be considered. These neighborhoods are historic neighborhoods, and we are talking about plunking this apartment building down in the middle of two historic neighborhoods. Is the city treasury in such dire shape that we're desperate to give up one of the last pieces of open property in town for the first developer who makes an offer? And where is our commitment to affordable housing anyway? There are so many things that we feel have never really been explained. I think that's part of why we keep coming back to you all. We just don't understand how this process developed. We know how hard you've worked. We trust you. You are our counsel. But why have we come to this point where the public is so dismayed and we're still moving ahead with this developer from a background that clearly doesn't understand what our city is about? All that's left now is for us to beg you, and perhaps Mayor Friedman has taken care of this, to find an alternative to this singularly ugly design that the developer is offering. It's testament to the fact that this developer has never understood Lexington, appears not to have made the effort to learn more, and I begin to suspect, frankly, doesn't care. Please. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Annalisa Fitzgerald, and on deck is Brenda McCannon.
Good evening. My name is Annalisa Fitzgerald. I live at 4 West Side Court, Lexington, Virginia. I appreciate all the comments that went before. Mine has simply to do with aesthetic. The area of Rockbridge and Lexington has extraordinary natural beauty. When we impose something new, such as an architectural structure, it is our responsibility to make sure that the highest standard of aesthetic is met, and most certainly that it does not detract from the aesthetic that our community has worked to maintain. The picture that I have seen of the design of the proposed structure for Spotswood does not reflect the aesthetic sensibility and character of Lexington. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalisa. Ms. McCannon, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Brenda McCannon, and I live in Rockbridge County. I've been a resident, full-time resident of Lexington for about 3.5 years now, but have owned land here for 14. And I was really drawn to Lexington because of its charm and the historical nature, the way that downtown was preserved. It really drew me here. And I know there are many people who have come here as well for similar reasons. When I saw this, the proposal in the paper and saw the photograph, I was immediately struck by the design. I lived for quite some time in Lawrence, Kansas, which is a town which also worked very hard to preserve the historical character of the town. I was there this early in the fall and drove around the campus of University of Kansas and saw a very similar set of buildings there. And I can only say, in juxtaposition to the beautiful historical buildings there, they were shocking. And that was what I thought of when I saw the picture in the paper. They reminded me so much of those buildings that were strikingly out of place in the position they were in. And I feel strongly this building will be similar. It has, to be kind, a fairly stark industrial feel to it based on the photos that I saw in the paper. And I can't help but think that that is not going to age well here. And it is certainly going to be in stark contrast to the rest of the neighborhoods around it. Along with that, of course, I have concerns about the traffic impact, the width of that lot. How does that affect the setback of that building and the parking? What landscaping is going to help cover that up? Anyway, those are my concerns. I think that real thought needs to be given to the aesthetics of that building, and certainly at the very least, some design changes made to make it fit in with the historical character of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McCannon. Those are all the folks that had signed up to speak. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this topic? Mr. Kosovic, please. Yes, please. When I acknowledge you, if you could please step forward and state your name and address for the clerk, and same 3 minutes apply. Thanks for being with us.
George Kosovic, 208 South Randolph Street. I can almost see this spot from our backyard. A couple of things that I haven't heard mentioned before: the parking requirements and the parking spaces available, and the fact that the idea for that property is to attract young professionals, to attract people who might be working from home, perhaps people with one child. And I wonder when a child care person comes to the house, when a guest comes to someone living in that apartment, where do they park? What happens to the normal inflow of people who come to do business with, or come to serve, or come to socialize with the people who are the residents of that complex? Where do they go? And I haven't heard it addressed. As to the matter of the aesthetics, I look at the hospital and I wonder, what's that going to look like in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years? Every hospital in the region that I'm aware of has either redone its look as a part of rebranding or expanding their services or their business empire, or has plans to do so. And sometimes the changes are rather radical. And one of the ones that's most common is, we sort of done it here. We've seen it here. It's gone from a building or a little set of buildings that sort of dominate a plot to a building that's on a campus-like setting. Our hospital here strikes me as that. And I wonder, what is Carillion planning? And are they going to change the look of the hospital? Are they going to build out? Is any of that going to impact how the proposed development at the Spotswood property will look and appear, and how it will appeal? Just 2 points I wanted to add to throw into the thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Mr. Mott. I'll get you, Debbie.
Good evening. My name is Glenn Mon, resident of Rockbridge County. We just moved here just a little less than 18 months ago. Since that short period of time, I've become aware of things that are going on in the community that we chose to live in, that did not choose us. And I would just like to make council aware of a couple of technical things that I think should be considered and brought to your attention relative to the approval for this CUP application. Because it also gives you an insight as to what your potential partner is going to be all about. As I understand it, there was call it an agreement of sale with an attachment titled Spotswood Drive Parcel Project Expectations, and essentially made a part of that sales commitment. Now, this was pointed out at Planning Commission, that in the CUP application by Echelon, they changed their commitments from what they had agreed to and signed off on those project expectations. Specifically, contained within the project expectations document, Echelon consented to provide rain gardens and or other bioretention structures on site within the required green space. Consider the use of pervious pavement to minimize stormwater leaving the site. All stormwater management plans require approval of both the city and DEQ. However, in their CUP application, which was approved by the Planning Commission, the applicants, they stated the applicant will provide on-site stormwater management and or rain gardens and or other bioretention facilities where feasible. The second issue, under site buffers, in the project expectations document, Echelon consented to existing trees in these buffer areas must be maintained. However, in their CUP application, applicant stated that they had modified this in their CUP application by stating existing trees in these buffer areas will be maintained where feasible. A simple layman's reading of that says those issues are in conflict. The other issue, since I only have about 15 seconds left, please consider the precedent you all might be establishing by ignoring one portion in terms of the width requirement of a property in your zoning ordinance for the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mon. Thank you for being with us and highlighting those details. Debbie Pollard, please come on up.
Signed up on the wrong form.
We'll skip you on the public comment.
Sure, thank you. Debbie Pollard, I live at 5 Jordan Street. I'm a little confused by the whole process here because in order to go through the process of obtaining a conditional use permit, they have to do that based on the design, and the design was never approved. So I'm just not understanding how why we're putting the horse before the cart, so to speak. It would seem to me that we need as a community to approve a design before we go through the whole effort of asking the Planning Commission and the developer to work through this process again. But it seems like it might be that might be where we're going. Last year you told us that we were choosing a developer and not a design. And so now, after what we've seen in the newspaper and what we're hearing tonight is that you think, or the developer thinks, that their design is appropriate. And so they've approved the conditional use permit. And I think that we've been misled. I think that's problematic. And I'm really sorry that you all have to sit here with these stone faces and listen to the same comments over and over. But I think we just cannot impress upon you enough about how wrong we think this whole process has been. Aesthetically, I agree. Aesthetically, the building is awful. But I think as a community, as Dee said, we are not looking for another colonial building, but neither are we looking for a box, as Echelon proposed, that belongs in a suburban Fairfax County development. You see those up there all the time. I moved back here from them, and it looks like just where I came from, and they're ugly, and they don't sustain themselves. So I'd like for all of us to consider that again. Again, also the parking issues. We need to not have a big surface parking lot right out there where everybody can see it. The previous developer who did not win, whose proposal did not win, at least had placed smaller parking lots around the area, so they were less obtrusive, and their landscape design was exceptional. It was just exceptional. It provided greenery for the people that would be living there. It was restful. And I think that it's important that we take that into consideration. The last thing I want to say is about the fact that there is no affordable housing there. You would have to be making $75,000 a year to afford $1,800 a month. And I don't know any young professional, and certainly any new teacher that would be coming into this area that makes that kind of money. So I think we need to relook at the issue of affordable housing units in that project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pollard. There are others who want to speak to this topic. Yes, Jan. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Jan Lowry. I am not a citizen of Lexington. I live just outside city limits in Rockbridge County. But things that happen in Lexington do affect us in the county. And I might be a little Johnny-come-lately in my comments, but we often see and hear signage of shop local. I've been a strong believer in shopping local, even if it might mean a little bit more expense. But I'm wondering how the citizens of Lexington and Rockbridge County can believe in shop local when their leadership does not. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Are there others who would like to speak to this topic? Don Henke. Come on down.
Oh, my name is Don Henke. I don't live in Lexington either, but when I go to town, this is the town I go to. One of the things about this town is it's a tony little town. It has the kind of a look that's just really appealing to anyone, regardless of their aesthetic values and so forth. And then if you look at this crowd behind me right here, they come from all walks of life in this town. There are people on public assistance here. There are people that are professionals. There's college professors, there's engineers, there's farmers, ex-military. This crowd right here actually itself represents the whole gamut of this particular little community. And if these people are not satisfied with the aesthetics of the building they're thinking about building, you have a problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Yes. Good afternoon, Moria. Welcome. Thanks for being with us.
My name is Maria Schweitzer and I live at One Hill Circle in Lexington. There's been a lot of comments about the ugliness of the building. Part of the problem with that building is it has a flat roof. It has a flat roof because it can't be any taller by your zoning. And Echelon is attempting to shove as many units as possible into the footprint. If you went with the unit criteria on the narrowness or width of the lot, it would decrease the number of units possibly. And if you lopped one floor off of it, you can now pitch the roof. You decrease your parking space, which automatically increases your green space, and you lessen the impact on the traffic coming in and out of Spotswood Drive in all directions. The main problem I see is it is still too dense. They have cut it amazingly since their original proposal of 150 units. They're down to 62, but it is still too dense for that particular piece of property. Thank you.
Thank you, Moria. Anyone else who would like to speak about the Spotswood conditional use permit? Not seeing anyone, I will not close the public hearing, but continue it. And I'll look to my attorney, continue it to the next meeting, and then the intentions of continue it to the February 2nd meeting. And I feel compelled to respond to a couple of comments made during that piece. just for clarity, Edwin Gaskin and Echelon were introduced to this community by Noah Simon, who was the previous city manager. Noah Simon solicited when city council asked him to work on finding developers for the VDOT property and for Spotswood. The suggestion that Jim Hallis has any conflict or unethical standing with Echelon is completely false and inappropriate. And I just want to set the record straight on that. Regardless of what you think about the project, the box, it is not very attractive. And that's one of the reasons that I've asked two very experienced and capable and thoughtful members of council to meet with Echelon to talk about modifications to make it a more attractive and appropriate facility to complement the work and the scope of the neighborhood. So wanted to share those two pieces. One of the things that I hope is not lost on everyone in this room is that the housing stock in Lexington is very limited. This is an opportunity to increase it. And I think it's going to be a great project. And I know that the members of council who are up here and contending with it are, as I read in my prepared statements, have been working for over 2 years. And if you are late to the party and want to do the research, there's a spot on our website that identifies every bit of transparency related to this process, which has taken over 2 years. It is not something anyone's trying to cram down anyone's throat or do haphazardly, as some comments have suggested. This is a very thoughtful, very professional and high standard council that I support with the work that they've done and will continue to do. And I look forward to the work that Marilyn and Leslie will do in discussions with the builder to come up with a more attractive facility from that standpoint. Moving on to the next item of business is the consideration of minutes. They were provided in your packet. And unless council members have an objection to Janie's handiwork, we will approve those as presented. And they stand approved. Next item is citizens' remarks and comments. We request that prior notification be given to the city manager or myself by individuals wishing to address council. Public comments are always welcome. I ask that you sign up prior to our meeting, but if you didn't, you still have the opportunity to speak this evening. Again, ask you to stand at the podium and state your name and address for the clerk for the record, to the record. Make your comments to the council as a whole, be brief and state your position and provide facts. Provide written statements and or supporting materials to the clerk for distribution to the council. Debate is prohibited, and we ask you to speak clearly as we want to hear what you have to say. And Debbie, since you had signed up on this, I think you've said your piece. You're welcome to speak again. All set. Ramona Hazara, I'll ask you to come forward. And while she's coming forward, is there anyone else who intends to speak to council this evening on any other topic? Very good. Ramona.
Good evening. My name is Ramona Hazara, and I hope everyone behind me can hear me because we've had trouble hearing things in the back. I'm a property owner, 505 Jackson Avenue, and I'd like to talk about the change in the code of ethics for the city of Lexington. There was a discussion earlier this evening and some interesting comments were made, very worthwhile comments. And there is a change that is being considered by city council, what I would call diluting the code of ethics or the perception thereof. Elected officials in the city of Lexington understand the fiduciary responsibility in representing the voters of Lexington. And they also, the representatives also try very hard to remain impartial and make the right decisions. It's a tough job, I realize, because that there are certain individuals throughout that have relationships with the two large organizations in town, the two large employers. So why would city council want to change and potentially dilute the definition of Code of Ethics and Conduct when it applies not only to city council, but to the boards, committees, and commissions. And it will be a perception to the public that there is a downgrading in the Code of Ethics. Whether it's true or not, that would be a perception. And that was also referenced earlier in the working session meeting. The proposal, excuse me, addresses a change in the Code of Ethics by deleting in which they have a material financial interest or where they have an organizational responsibility or personal relationship that may give the appearance of a conflict of interest. Well, because of the two large employers in the city of Lexington, there will always be a perception of a conflict of interest. That can't be changed. And when you look at the makeup of city council, no offense, Leslie's husband is the dean of the Williams School of Business at WNL. Mr. Siegel's wife is a professor at WNL. Mr. Oligood's wife is a librarian at the WNL Law School. Mr. Smith's wife is a professor at WNL. Mr. Betts, you're a recent graduate of recent enough of WNL Law School. And so when you consider the makeup of the council, it's very hard to avoid a perception of a conflict of interest. And when you try to reconcile the Code of Ethics that applies to city council, and then there's a handbook also for the employees of the city, if you do a reconciliation, which is a good idea, it should be across the board for everything. And there was also discussion about making the Virginia code the baseline, and that may be sufficient. On the other hand, because of the unique situation in Lexington with two principal employers, you may need to go a higher level. And that was also discussed this evening. So with that, I will close because my time is just about out and say thank you for the work that you've done. And you have a tough job ahead of you with the Code of Ethics, because it will appear, the perception will be that you are diluting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramona, and thank you for being with us. Ms. McCannon, would you like to exercise and speak on something else?
I would just like to briefly say to you, thank you for all of you, for all of the hard work that I know you do outside of these meetings, as well as having to sit and listen to all of us complaining, since generally people don't come to these meetings to tell you the good news and the happy things about what you do. So thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate your kind comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to council this evening? Very good. Not identifying anyone. I will close the citizens' remarks and comments at 8:10. Next item, I'll call on city manager for unfinished business.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. There is really no unfinished business before you for action tonight, just two placeholders, as you will see in the agenda, as a reminder that these items will come forward at a future meeting. Can't hear either at this point? Wow,
I say, can you all hear the city manager? Not all.
I can do louder without the microphone, apparently.
Yeah.
But then they can't hear you.
These
on
two
the-
items on the agenda are just placeholders. They do not require any action this evening. And there will be forthcoming action, or these items will be included in an agenda in the future. I hope that was helpful. I don't know why I had my mouth this far from the microphone and it didn't work. So
Sometimes technology works well and sometimes it doesn't. But thank you for including those. Those are items that we're going to continue to work on and want to keep fresh in the minds of council as well as the citizens as we again have them as a placeholder on the agenda. Next item is reports and communications and boards and commissions. I'd like to call on Mr. Smith for the Blue Ridge Resource Authority.
Authority hasn't met, but a quick update. Chair Lyons of the authority and myself as secretary met with Director Dudley. Let's say Secretary Treasurer, sorry. Met with Director Dudley today for a couple hours to go through the draft budget for next year. I would just give you a heads up, anticipate a tipping fee increase, but a minimal one. We're doing some serious number crunching and want to make the impact as minimal as possible, but just an expectation. Not nearly as It will be minimal.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any questions for Mr. Smith? Main Street Lexington, Ms. Strawn.
No report.
Thank you, ma'am. Planning Commission, Ms. Strawn.
No report.
Go out with a bang. Very good. Regional Tourism Board has not met, and Mr. Ayers is enjoying his retirement and his first quiet Thursday night. Nick, look forward to your future reports on the Tourism Board. Rockbridge Area Recreation Organization, Mr. Ziegler.
I'll be brief. We met yesterday for our monthly Board of Directors meeting. Spring registration for our spring sports will be February 6th through 20th. We're starting work on our budget so that we're not the last organization in the area to submit our budget to our finance director, Jen. Leslie Ayers and myself. Leslie Ayers is on the County Board of Supervisors. She and I comprise the Finance Committee of the RARA Board of Directors because we are a board made of Buena Vista representatives, City of Lexington, and Rockbridge County. So it's a very cohesive board. Leslie Ayers and I will meet with the executive director on the 10th to start working on the budget. And then last but not least, all the folks that come out. We appreciate your participation in local government. We continue to have an opening on the RARO Board of Directors, and we would love to have someone from the City of Lexington come forward to help guide our awesome organization that provides opportunities to young and old. We've got all kinds of wonderful programs, including pickleball, including basketball, softball, baseball, wrestling, basketball. I mean, it just goes on and on, cheerleading. Football. It's an awesome organization, soccer. So if anyone would like to join us monthly, I think I've attended 96 consecutive meetings or something in the last 8 years or something. I don't know, but we would love to have you. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. Any questions? Hearing none. Threshold, Ms. Alexander.
No report.
Thank you, ma'am. Maury Service Authority, Mr. Alligood.
No report.
Terrific. Everyone enjoyed their holiday and quiet December, it appears, but that'll change as we look to the coming week. We've got quite a few things in the balance of this month. Specifically, I'll remind members of council, there's the Chamber State of the Community Breakfast on Monday at doors open at 7 at the Virginia Horse Center. So if you want to hear from the mayors of Lexington, Buena Vista, Board of Supervisors, and Cree Deeds, we will all be speaking at the breakfast on Monday. Again, that's at the Virginia Horse Center, and you can sign up through the chamber who is hosting this event. Also, I would like to make a plea for those of you who spoke earlier. I apologize for not asking, but if you have written comments that you prepared statements, if you could deliver those or a copy of those or email those to the clerk, I can assure you that we'll be sure to not misquote you, and we'll get the minutes done much more effectively and efficiently if we have copies of those comments that you offered earlier. And I want to give kudos to Ms. Alexander and Nick for attending the VML conference that was yesterday, certification of FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and also COIA, Conflict of Interest Act. Great opportunity to interact with newly elected officials from around the state and to meet leaders in our state that were making presentations about those and just the responsibilities that you have as you begin your journey as a new elected council member. I look at you, Nick, since you're new. We have two old folks that have been elected several times and know a thing or two, but the responsibilities and the insights offered and the networking that you can do around the state to understand, because we are not the only city looking at affordable housing or housing crunch. And it was fun to meet people from all over the state, from Chilhowie and Albemarle County and Front Royal and Warrenton to talk about the things that are their priorities and what their council's working on and what their communities hold as a priority. And as is always pointed out in the fiscal part of that meeting is your, if anybody wants to see your values and your vision, they need to look at your budget. because you put your money where your mouth is. So that's an ongoing and never-ending process for our staff and very, very hard work for our city council. With that, I will conclude my report. Or I'll just echo Mr. Ziegler's comments that I'm not sure that we have any applications for the Railroad Board at this point. We do have 2 vacancies on the Planning Commission with Nick's election to the City Council. And so those 2 positions will be taking applications and look forward to appointing someone to serve on the Planning Commission. So if you have an interest, please let us know. If you need more details, Arnie and Jim are available for, as well as information on our website for those and any other committees that may be of interest to you. And with that, I will turn it over to the city manager and ask him to be proud and speak loud.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Am I being heard now? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Just a little update on public transportation ridership. Radar, who is our operator of public transportation here locally, noted that the ridership continues to increase on Maury Express, and it's up over 18.65% in December from December of 2021. Our Planning District Commission has submitted a grant to the Appalachian Regional Commission on behalf of Lexington, Buena Vista, Rockbridge, Bath, and Highland counties to fund a position to seek out and identify grant opportunities for our communities. The 5 localities that are noted are located within the federal government Appalachian Regional Commission funding area. So these are potential grant opportunities that if that employee is hired by the PDC, can be identified or may be identified by this individual. They would be searching for grants that we qualified for because of our inclusion in the Appalachian Regional Commission. Little information on some property closings. We all are aware that the city has agreed to purchase a portion or a property, 3 properties adjacent to our 2 cemeteries. Those closings should occur within the next 2 weeks. I checked with our representatives who are working on those closings. A little update from the police department. Of course, they worked a little bit of a long night on New Year's Eve to make sure that everything was safe and secure during that celebration downtown. Currently, the department is undergoing its reaccreditation activities, and every law enforcement agency in the Commonwealth is expected to be inspected and certified on a regular basis, and it is our turn. The accreditation officers are here in the city at this point in time. Officers completed 28 hours of foot patrol throughout the city the last week of December. So we're trying to keep our officers not only on the street, but literally on the street and sidewalk as opposed to just out in their vehicles. Update from the fire department. The department made their fire bays available for equipment inspection required for the reaccreditation of the police department vehicles. So, you know, the inspectors, the agents on site now have to look at the vehicles the police department uses, as well as policies, procedures, training, etc. The fire department is hosting the Regional Fire Training Academy, which started this January 3rd, just 2 days ago. And the department will provide logistical support and part-time instruction staff during the academy. The department provided the first half of the CPR and first aid training for the WNL staff and faculty, with the second half of this training to occur in the very near future. The department will use a structure on North Lee Highway, owned by Mr. Eric Spencer, for a broad variety of training activities before it is set on fire to practice live burn suppression. And these training opportunities are hard to come by, and the department is very thankful for this opportunity. The department will be partner with the Rockbridge Fire and Rescue during the training exercises. And of course, again, this is very unique that you have, or the fire department has an opportunity to take an existing building, cut holes in the roof, chop their way through the doorways and walls to practice or simulate what would happen in a real live fire, and then burn the structure down. I don't know where this is exactly. I understand it's near Hall's Drive-In, and some of you may know Mr. Eric Spencer. I don't claim to know him. Parking garage closing on or about December 29, the fire suppression water lines in the parking garage just across the street, down the way and across the street a little bit, froze. And so the Rockbridge County Maintenance Department is responsible for this maintenance and in the garage, and has been actively working to make repairs. Unfortunately, the first contractors identified to make the repairs were a no-show earlier this week. So the maintenance staff of the county has now scheduled somebody to come in either today and or tomorrow to make repairs. And hopefully that'll be done before next week, because there are some jury activities in the courthouse next week. But it should also be known that, of course, the garage itself won't burn. The fire suppression is in there for vehicles that may catch fire. So there's no danger of the garage burning down, but as a safety precaution, those type of suppression systems are now installed in almost every garage that are constructed for parking. In our planning development report for the year over year, the planning and development department activities showed a general trend of increases over 2021. And of their activities reported, I'll just go through these as briefly, but administrative activities increased from 534 in 2021 to 603 in 2022. Development activities were basically the same, 54 in 2021, 53 in 2022. Enforcement activities, I guess in a positive trend, declined this year. They were 1,223 activities in 21, 1,134 in 22. So I guess that's a good thing that fewer people had to be reminded they needed to comply with our city codes and ordinances. Permit fees collected, it went from $102,178 in 2021 to $140,391 this past year, which is a good sign. There's more activity than we had in the previous year. And the value of improvements went from $15,838,794 to $20,020,385, again, representing more activity in the community. And that's not through any one classification. That's all classifications: business, residential, et cetera, institutional, et cetera. So it doesn't mean there's been an increase in business that it makes up that entire amount, or residential. It's just a blended, if you will, figure. The only other item I have is with regard to the VDOT property. I think I've been instructed by City Council to go out and put together a request for proposal process and document that can be sent out so that we can then receive proposals for potential development opportunities of that site. And the potential uses that are preferred that were included in the RFP include multifamily, housing, retail entities, commercial entities, or business entities, or a mixed use proposal combining several of these elements. Just to inform City Council, I was working with the Berkeley Group, who has consultants that are active in this type of business development and proposal creation. And so we're ready to go in that in the next several weeks. So just FYI, it'll be ready to roll out soon, and we'll see what kind of responses we get. That's all I have. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Got to keep close to the mic.
Mr. Alligood.
I have a follow-up question from a couple of months ago. With regard to the big water leak at W&L. I've been kind of waiting for the follow-up report on how that all played out and the status of it.
Well, as you might guess, W&L indicated that they did not feel they were responsible for the leak. So we're still having conversations about that. The infrastructure where the leak occurred, it is debatable under any fair type of review as to who owned it. In my position as city manager, I believe that fire protection is the ownership of the building owner, but it's not clear in writing anywhere that that was agreed upon, and that is their position. So we're still having discussions in that regard.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question along those lines. So my understanding, after going to the VML conference, there were some, I guess, presenters where there is some type of, insurance. And is that something we have in place, or is that?
I'll try to address the question since I know what you're talking about, and Jim may be scratching his head. There was a vendor that's Home Serve is the company name, and they provide communities with a conduit for insurance. Of course, every homeowner is responsible from the meter to their home. And if the leak occurs there, it's on the homeowner. On the other side of the meter, it's on the city. So if the pipe freezes, you hope it's on the cities if you're a homeowner. Home Serve works to protect people for a fee, of course. And there were several examples given where folks may have had a pipe freeze and their 24-hour, 7-day-a-week support staff out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. You have that issue, you call in, and it's taken care of, including payment of the water bill. They will look at the last 3 months average, if I remember correctly, so if your bill is typically $100 a month and that one was $2,000, you're responsible for your normal 100. The other 1,900 would be covered by this company with the insurance. So it's not something that the city offers right now. That was part of the reason for the woman that was there talking and saying that she would come visit our community, and it may be something that we make available on our website. We don't necessarily take a piece of the action. We just make people aware of it. There is, I know, Dominion, not resources, but there's a Dominion group that looks a lot like your electric bill that sends out an opportunity to buy insurance for the same type of circumstances. So, but currently the city does not offer or endorse anyone for that, but we do have, help me with the terminology, but we do have a system that you can subscribe to monitor your water usage. In the event that it spikes, you can get an alert, and it's simply online, can be tied into an app, and as well as on your email. So if you haven't signed up for that, strongly recommend, because if you have a toilet or some other pipe that's leaking underground and you don't know about it till you get your water bill, and then it's like, well, I didn't use that much water, there must be a problem. This will alert you ahead of time, so any problem can be dealt with much sooner. And that's a service that is of no cost to the residents, direct to sign up. We do pay for the service as part of our annual budget, but that's something we offer to all members of the community. Yeah, the water portal. So if you go to Public Works on our website, say it. Census.
Mr. Mayor, if I may note, we also do have a system where if you have a high water usage situation, you can appeal that to the city, and under our process, of course, that water that leaks normally does not go into the sewer. So we will charge nothing for that excessive use on your sewer side of the utility bill. And then we will do similar to what the insurance company does, look at your last 6 months of usage, average that out, charge you for only that usage, and forego the rest of that. Now, we only do it once. So if somebody has a problem under their house and the pipe breaks in a cold weather or for any other circumstance, they don't know what's occurred, they don't have to pay for that excess. We do insist then that they, in order to do that, they get on the census system. So they can then watch later on to be sure it doesn't happen. And we have had good success with that, but it doesn't occur that often, frankly. Dozen, 18 times a year, fortunately, that somebody has that kind of occurrence. And sometimes it's a contractor who comes into the backyard and pouring cement and leaves the hose running. It's a variety of reasons. So just FYI.
Thank you, Jim. Ms. Alexander.
Yeah, the program that they talked about yesterday is a leak protection program on service lines, and they warranty the repairs, anything from clogged toilets that damage your home, water sewer services, inside and outside, frozen pipes, up to $3,000 per repair in the house and $8,000, I believe, outside. And they talked about a revenue sharing program with city governments. So there are benefits to the municipality.
Indeed. Trying to keep people safe and operations working well. Any other questions for the city manager? Excellent. Thank you all very much. City attorney.
Mayor, happy to answer any questions, of course, if anybody has any.
Very good. Hearing no questions, I'm not aware of any new business. And
Just a question.
Sure.
What about this, the member statement before us? Are we tabling that, or are we going with the
member statement before you, I would suggest somewhat defer to my attorney for recommendation. I mean, if we sign it, we sign it tonight, yes, the code of ethics. Here you go. You may not have seen it, but this member statement, which references the code of ethics, you're welcome to sign it. You're welcome not to sign it. it will be applicable to what we have in place. But if, as we move into the future, what's referenced.
I would say what's referenced in here is the code of ethics as it stands now. If you amend the code of ethics in the future, then you can either sign an amended document, or we can just note in the adoption of a revised code of ethics that it's what applies to these member statements.
Yeah, good question, but thank you. Yeah, and for those of you in the audience, our member statement, which is Code of Ethics and Conduct, Lexington, Virginia, Lexington City Council, boards, commissions, and committees, and states, as a member of the Lexington City Council or a Lexington board or committee or commission, I agree to uphold the Code of Ethics and Conduct for elected and appointed officials adopted by the city and conduct myself by the following model of excellence. I will A, recognize the worth of individual members and appreciate their individual talents, perspectives, and contributions. B, help create an atmosphere of respect and civility where individual members, city staff, and the public are free to express their ideas and work to their full potential. C, conduct my personal and public affairs with honesty, integrity, fairness, and respect for others. D, respect the dignity and privacy of individuals and organizations. E, keep the common good as my highest purpose and focus on achieving constructive solutions for the public benefit. Avoid and discourage conduct which is divisive or harmful to the best interest of Lexington, and treat all people with whom I interact in the manner I wish to be treated. And then it states, I affirm that I have read and understand the Lexington Code of Ethics and Conduct and the Virginia Conflict of Interest Act. And we ask each member of council to sign on to that. And if you are comfortable with signing it, again, we would be adopting the what is stated now, and we've got work in the future as we talked about at our work session. How's that for clarity?
That's very clear. But just one follow-up question. So we'd be agreeing that including the stricken language with it, that it was the appearance of the conflict if we were.
That's incorrect. This is
this is a separate statement that is, because the reason why I asked that is because it says I agree to uphold the Code of Ethics and Conduct. So that's why I'm asking if it's the current.
That would be the existing code of ethics that has not been amended because that was not voted on. Yeah.
Right. So it would be the current Code of Ethics.
Yes.
Yeah,
The
it's as of
language
this
remains
date.
in it.
Sure.
That-
As of this date.
As of this date,
As of this day.
because it has not been amended. Thank you.
good questions. Very well. No other business to come before city council. We will stand adjourned and look forward to seeing you. Don't forget about chamber. Yes, breakfast, State of the Community breakfast.